we are in home of Bud. Where's that person's name over there?
Oh, fuck me.
What's the date? Date is 9/1/1985. And we're here at Carey Reunion.
She bites me.
We have a brother and 3 brothers and a sister.
She don't want to forget. She knows that.
Carol is the eldest of the 4. Earl, Eugene, and Rodney. As you can see, there was, as the years wore on, most of the beauty was used up earlier.
You're on the wrong end of that.
So we'd like to start out by having either one of you, probably Carol, since you're the oldest.
Whoa, she really.
Most of us know nothing, at least, well, some do, but I don't. Nothing about your parents, how they met, where they came from, when they were married, and then just some brief history about when each of you came along, where you were living, what was going on, that sort of thing.
Okay, Earl, you might have to help me a little on this.
Carol should tell her age, don't you?
Well, it's very obvious I'm old. But that was thrill. Rodney heard me come out and say I'm 60 years old. My. Well preserved. Okay, you want a little history of Mom and Dad. And Edith, I might call on you to help fill in some too, but
What I don't know, I'll make her.
Whoa.
okay. Of course, Mom, along with the rest of the Walker family, came out from Iowa. Homesteaded near Wilson Creek, between Heartline and Wilson Creek. And that's where Mom graduated from Heartline High School. Then she went on, she did go to Cheney Normal at that time. Then, as I understand, Dad did teach school back in Knob-Knob-Stir, Missouri. You know, I haven't thought of this for years.
I thought nobody remembered that town except me, Noster, Missouri.
Okay, then he came out after, must have been before the war, because during World War I, Earl Kirkland and Dad were in the same infantry. They were in France during that war time.
That Johnny's dad?
That's Johnny Kirkland's dad.
That's why our family friendships go back a long way.
Yeah, that's why they. And of course, Johnny's mother Lizzie was an Edwards, and that's a pioneer Heartline family too. So, but anyway, after the war, Dad worked for Evans as a farm hand, and I suppose both living in the town of Heartline, that's where they got acquainted. Something happened anyway, and then Dad got in the post office, and I can remember living, just barely remember, now even George would remember this, living behind the post office. And then they bought the old Dr. Cox's house down across from the school. And I think I probably was about 5 years old when we moved down there. And we had a fire there. The house burned up. Or caught on fire. I don't remember. Gene and Rodney, I don't think we were even on those.
You were all out at the same that time?
Right, at the time we had the fire. They had just remodeled the house. We moved back in, and I think they met this lady. They was getting ready to have a baby shower for Kate Strauss, and that was a school superintendent. And she was about ready to have Dick. Mom was doing a baby shower for her. And I can't remember whether it was a few days before the baby shower or a few days after the house burned up. we were all out to Aunt Chloe's. We could see smoke out in the distance, and I can remember Uncle Russell and Dad climbing up on the old windmill, looking, trying to see where that smoke was. And finally, they got in the car and drove to town, and it was our house. And all the people in town had tried to save everything, and they had formed a man brigade to hand stuff to get it out. But needless to say, we lost a lot in fire, so that night we moved up to Grandma Walker's house up across from the old Methodist church. And that's where we stayed while our house was being rebuilt. And it was a funny thing. I can remember, speaking of fires, even I was sleeping in the Grandma's bedroom upstairs, right across from the Methodist church, and we woke up one night. The Methodist church was on fire and burned up, and that's been good in my memory. 2 fires, I mean, that just kind of came unglued, I guess. And Earl, I don't know where you were all the time.
How did the fire start?
I don't even, you mean the Methodist church or our house?
No, your house.
It started from a short electric stove. Mom had been canning that day. And I suppose in those days the stoves weren't that good.
Electric stove.
And we did have electric stove. It was one of those that had the oven that was up quite high, you know, like this rounded oven. And then you had 2 burners over here and no.
We went for a lot of years after it before we got electric stoves, and so I just remember that wood stove.
I suppose.
We had a wood stove at the same time.
No, we didn't.
Weren't electric stoves rather rare?
They were very rare in those days. And this was the kind that had a flat surface and then 2 burners, and then it had the oven raised up like this. It's an old Westinghouse, and then it had legs on it, and nothing underneath.
They didn't have electricity, did they? Back when they were.
Anyway. Okay, well, getting back to that wood stove bit. After the fire, then when we rebuilt, Arthur Hinthorn and Earl Pease, or Earl Hill. Earl Hill built that house then, and yes, a kitchen stove did go in, no electric stove. But I don't think you can remember that at our house, Dr. Cox's house.
Sure I do. I remember the fire.
You mean it's in the same location though as Grandma's,
Yeah.
the Grandma's house that we know?
They just rebuilt there. But anyway, then we moved back into the house, and somewhere along the years, along came Jean. And I can remember the morning that Jean was born. We also had a cow. That was about ready to have a calf. And so Bud Swigert, of all people, said, "Gee, isn't that neat? The Careys had a calf and a baby at the same time." He told Grandma Swigert this. She told Mom. But anyway, I can remember that morning they had, Mom evidently had gone into labor, and they had called Doc Anderson down from Wilbur to come take care of her, and so us kids had to get up and get ourselves ready to go to school, and of course I guess I always was bossy, and I was trying to get Georgia going, and I can remember going in the bathroom, and I don't know, George was crawling out the window, and I said, "What are you doing that for?" And he said, "Well, they won't let us out there. We can't go out the door, so the only way we can get out is crawl out the window." I don't want to go to school. Well, you better crawl out the window, too. So we crawled out the window and went to school.
You mean they wouldn't let you go past the bedroom window?
I don't know. George just told me we were supposed to crawl out the window. Anyway, that's when Jean was born. How old were you then?
$. Yeah, that's a lot.
Oh, I must have been, how much younger than I am? How old are you, Jean?
What are the age differences?
You're 10 years older than me. No, you're 8 years older than me.
So you would have been
Well,
8.
you're 52 then, so I would have been 8 years old.
Eva would be how old? What are the age differences? Eva, what's hers?
Eva would be, she would be about 4 years older than I, almost 5. But she was born in 1920, George in 22, and I was born in 24, and Earl in 27.
And then the difference between you two?
There's 6 years between Jean and I, and 2 years or so between.
About 18 months.
18 months.
When Jean was born, I went to school that morning, crawling out that same window.
I don't know why they told us we had to do that.
But George said that you're supposed to go out this window.
You know, our bathtub was right here, and then this big window, you know, you just raise the window and pull out. And,
So I came home at noon, and I had, you know, like kids in those days, you had no idea what was going on. They said, hey, go and look what you got in the bedroom. And walked in there, and here was Jean laying there with Mom, and I couldn't imagine how in the world that baby got there. Anyway, there he was.
then along comes Rodney. I don't remember too much what happened the day he was born, but I can remember I came home from school and here was Mom in bed with another baby. And I jumped up on her bed and I was so excited, and I walked on top of the bed, went over, bent over and picked you up. Walked back and jumped off of the bed, baby in my arm, and I remember Grandma Walker just about scalped me. She said, "Don't you ever do that again." And she said, "You could drop that baby," and I said, "Well, I didn't."
I thought you were going to tell us what happened to it.
Yeah, I dropped it on his head. Okay, now it's time for you guys to take over.
Or any questions from anyone else, too?
Where did Grandpa Carey, where did his parents come from?
Missouri, Knobster.
They were born in Missouri, or did they come from Europe, or where did they originally come from?
I think they came from Ireland. And by the way, Grandma Carey was red-headed.
Where did her parents originally come from?
You mean Grandma Carey?
Uh-huh.
Okay, they came from Seymour, Iowa, I believe.
They call themselves Pennsylvania Dutch.
Dutch.
Whatever that means. You ask them what they are, they say we're Pennsylvania Dutch.
Okay, and that's where that recipe for
Maybe Edith can help us there.
yeah, for those eggs came from, was Grandma Walker's Pennsylvania Dutch recipe. I can remember that.
German, Pennsylvania Dutch?
Mom,
Well,
Mom
It's
always
a
said they
low
had
German, if
German.
you want to know. All right, German. And that's the truth.
I think you're right. I think it is a low German. So,
So did part of our ancestors come from Germany or from Ireland or both?
both I was sitting.
I would say both. I think the Careys were mostly. It's rather unusual because usually Irish are Catholic.
Well, the letter that I had said that the Carey side of the family came from Ireland in 17-something. One of Roy's sisters wrote to me and gave me that information. If I'd only wanted it, I would have brought it. But 17-something, they came from Ireland. And she said we were not part of the Shanty Irish, so they might have been the Low German, but you weren't the Low Irish.
Yeah. Okay, Dad, I do know came from a family of 12.
Where the Jewish part come from?
Well, who's Jew? Isn't me. Which one of you is Jew?
That's the one that married into the family.
Well, back in those days, of course not. too many children survived, and so I think quite a few of the kids survived, and did not survive. And I can remember a brother Earl who went through World War I also and ended up in a veterans hospital down in Walla Walla. I remember Dad going down to see him. I can remember him taking probably George Eve and I don't know whether he took you or not, Earl, down to see him. And then he passed away. Then he did have 3 sisters. Aunt Em was back in Kansas City, Missouri. Then we had an Aunt Marie and an Aunt Mima in Oregon and Washington. And quite a few cousins which we have not kept in touch with. In fact, one cousin was a Baptist minister in Yakima, and Reva and Edith got us together, tried to get us together to get acquainted with that cousin. His name was Don, and he was minister then of the church, Baptist church in Spokane for a while.
Don Parrott, wasn't he?
Parrott.
Jack Parrott?
Jack Parrott. Everett Parrott was a evangelist that went around, and that was Jack's dad. And I remember when I was going to business school in Spokane, he held a camp meeting at Revival Center, the church Florence that we went to. What was the name of that? Revival?
Yeah, Revival Center.
Revival Center. He held evangelistic meetings there. We remember we went and talked to him.
Were the 4 of you acquainted with both sets of grandparents? Were they alive when you were small?
No, I remember Grandma Walker.
You should, because she spoiled you rotten. The folks could
You want to put that
not.
out from the
Now we're getting to the good stuff.
No, she's the only grandma I remember. Grandma.
Right, But Rodney was just little enough that he would, run around her rocking chair. She sat in the rocking chair a lot. And I'm sure, like little kids are to older people, they're a lot of pleasure. And nobody could touch Rodney. Nobody could say no to him. Mom could not spank him, but Grandma Walker just had a fit.
Grandma Walker, she lived with us for several years after she couldn't take care of herself. And actually, Gene and Rodney both, she really thought they were untouchables.
Yeah, the rest of us had to walk the straight and narrow, but they could do anything.
Did the Carey side, the grandparents, were they in Hortland?
I don't know. I don't
No,
remember.
I did not see them. All I remember about Dad's folks is, I think his dad, died very early when the kids were very little. And Grandma Carey, as Mom tells me, was very small and red-headed and very stubborn and very snappy. We marched to her tune.
And she was redheaded, and our grandma Carey was redheaded. Alta was redheaded.
No.
Oh, so your
No.
grandma Carey,
Yeah, Dad's mother.
our great grandma.
I remember the hospital visit you're talking about for Uncle Earl.
Mm-hmm.
He gave Dad some money because I was his namesake. And Dad bought that land right across behind the school where we used our pasture for our cows.
Can you tell us some memories about your father that you each have?
Most of us didn't get to know him.
Oh yeah, his dad I was probably 19 or 20 when he passed away. But growing up, I think the best thing I can remember, he would do something with us every night. And we used to have a baseball game going out there in the barnyard. And so I think he planned it that way because we would have to take shovels. We always had about 6 or 8 or 10 cows around and pigs and chickens. We would actually clean that barnyard till it was absolutely just like this carpet, and then we could play baseball every night. And we had the cleanest barnyard you ever saw. Go out there and play baseball. Remember that?
He would,
Every night.
yeah, and on the front lawn, he'd always get down on his hands and knees and give us horseback rides. Up until we got too big to be riding, and it got kind of embarrassing to see trying to haul these kids around with their legs a dragging, giving us horseback rides and bucking us off. But he was a very kind and gentle and fella.
Now, when did he die?
Virginia?
In 1948.
48.
October 27th, because it's Kurt's birthday.
Yeah, 1948. Yeah.
And what was it, heart condition or?
Don't you remember him, Charlene?
Well, I remember a few things of Grandpa, mainly when some of the kids were out on the back, the woodshed in the back, is that what it was, where they fell lettuce and we were playing
The chicken
on the
hutch?
lawn.
The
And
chicken
Grandpa
hutch?
went out and chased us off.
Yeah.
We'd run around behind and then climb up in that roof. And
Yeah.
I think I was probably maybe 3 or 4.
I was up
But
working.
of all things, that's what I remember about Grandpa.
Just chased me off of there.
That roof.
Which brings back to mind when Rodney and Junior, Gene, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Everybody heard it. It's all right.
It was Junior in those days because the folks couldn't come up with a name for Gene because we were going to church down at Cooley at that time, and what was those people? They just lost their
Don't
son.
mention the name.
Well, it was Lyle of all things. She came up with tears in her eyes, and she just begged Mom to name Gene Lyle after her son. And of course, Mom, being so kind, she can't refuse. So she comes home and says the name's going to be Lyle. Well, Eva just about hit the ceiling because she knew the kid, and she didn't like the name Lyle. Just didn't want Gene named Lyle at all. So poor Gene, every night at the supper table. That was dinner time was our time to visit and share time we had at dinner time. And so for quite a few nights, our sharing was what we wanted to call a new baby in the house. And so he finally was called Junior because nobody could agree on a name. And it went for quite a while before...
Quite a while, went long enough where we sat down at the dinner table one time, and Gene was old enough to know what's going on. We said, we've got to give this kid a name. Well, this is true.
You think this is funny? This is true.
Why didn't you come up with one?
This is a case where they said, now we want your kids to all help, name this child. Well, none of us could agree, and we all had a voice.
So we came up with Roy Eugene.
No, you didn't.
Oh, didn't we?
Eugene.
No,
You came up with Roy E.
Roy
That's right.
I didn't have a middle name.
That's right.
And
right.
so I started in the first grade as Roy E. Carey.
All right, that's why we called you Junior.
And so I was called Junior. And up about the 5th or 6th grade, I decided I was getting a little old to be called Junior. And I didn't know what else to be called. And I couldn't be called E, my middle name. That somehow just didn't seem to make sense. And so I wanted a middle name like everyone else, so I started looking around at names that started with an E, but I could have a full middle name. And so I came up with the name Eugene, and so I started having them call me Gene at school. And then when I was about 18, after I got out of high school, I was just about ready to go into the service, and so I went into court and had my first and second name switched around, so it became Eugene Roy. And now I've just dropped the Eugene and I've signed it Gene R.
Yeah, do you kids remember? Gene, you were kind of a little devil back then. You were the oldest, you and Rodney, you both were. And remember when you got the hair clippers and you gave Rodney a haircut? A mohawk.
I don't recall that, Carol.
He got the clippers.
I'll vouch for that.
He took those clippers and just made a
Yeah.
swipe right down the middle of his head.
How old have they been?
Oh, Gene probably wasn't over 2.5. But they used to get in some of the greatest capers. those
I'll
two.
tell you one about Rodney. Rodney was probably 3 or 4 years old, and Mom couldn't break him of going out and get in the sugar bowl, and he'd grab that sugar bowl.
No, that was Gene.
No, it was Rodney. And he'd go underneath the table and sit there and just eat that dumb sugar.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh.
God.
And so Mom says, well, I know how I can fix that. So she got that sugar bowl, dumped it all out, put in Epsom salt. Set it there on the table, and we could hardly contain ourselves to watch Rodney go out there and grab that thing. Went down underneath that table, grabbed a big spoonful of that junk and put it in his mouth, and he'd come out of there spitting and stuttering, and that finished that. He didn't do that again. Remember that?
I don't remember.
Speaking of food, remember how George disliked cottage cheese?
Oh, yeah.
And you guys one night fixed him up a big
Never
dish of
learned
ice
to
cream and hid some cottage cheese down underneath it. You and Bud, I think.
Probably Earl and Bud.
No.
But another escapade that Gene and Rodney did was Mom had been killing chickens. And they were wanting to help her, so they went out in the chicken yard and they grabbed a couple chickens. And they still were like 2.5. I mean, they're 3 years old, just little tykes. And they got the chickens, and they went out behind the woodshed, and you had the axe, and between the two of you, tried to chop those chickens' heads off. And I tell you, that was something else. They, of course, didn't have strength to do it. And they got the heads half off. There was these chickens flopping around. Of course, then they got kind of scared, and they went running in the house. Mom, Mom!
Remember that? No. They can tell anything they want to. What I remember most about Dad was, as far as I can remember, we'd all go to the post office and there'd be a pile of sacks, mail sacks. You remember that? And we'd go up from our house up there and see Dad, visit him. And of course we'd get sleepy, and then we'd take naps on those mail sacks. And we'd sleep there 2-3 hours, in the afternoons and mornings.
Yeah.
Then he always taught us. We all got taught how to sort mail. Did you? You and Harold learn that?
Oh, yeah.
So we all at the noon would train and come in and would. When it was just little tiny tykes, we'd be sorting mail, putting in the people's boxes. I remember that.
Another thing Dad used to let us do that's a no-no now, and living in Heartline you could do it, was we all got to drive the car when we were pretty little. You know, we could hardly see over the steering wheel, and particularly Earl. We could hardly see over, but yet in Heartline, he's like 8 years old, and you were driving the car around. And I can remember Mom was going up to Elmira to visit, or out in the country from Elmira to visit Aunt Nettie. And she was taking a bunch of ladies from Heartline along with her. And she sent Earl up to pick up this one particular woman. She didn't know whether she wanted to ride with that
I remember the car we learned to drive in was an old Willys, and nowadays your steering wheel is like this, sitting in front of you. Well, these times these steering wheels were like this. Well, if I'd sit there like that, I couldn't reach the pedal, so you'd get down in between the spokes of the steering wheel and stand there. Then you could work the pedal.
You'd steer with your whole body?
Oh yeah, you can steer with your shoulders.
What if the lady didn't want to go?
Dad used to think that was funny, and Mom would just have a fit.
Well, I think Dad taught Gene and I to drive out in that pasture
Yeah.
just west of the house.
We could get that old green Plymouth, remember that car?
Yeah.
Race it around out in that field and wouldn't hurt it.
There was a big level spot over there by the baseball diamond. They call it the airstrip. Remember that? And
Bill
that's,
Fredericks had his airport
That's
over
where George learned to fly.
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.
I think that's where we learned to drive on that flat
Yeah.
strip there.
Remember that hangar that was there in the corner? Bill kept his airplane in there?
Oh, yeah.
That old wooden hangar? Room for one little single engine plane.
Is that the same strip that Bill had throughout the...
Right.
I think it was, yeah.
Right, that was the only
Had an
air.
air sock up there at the corner of the fence, remember that?
Well, he was in that pasture that we had. It was also the airfield for Heartline. So.
Yeah.
And it's also the high school baseball diamond was always
Right next to it.
Right next to it, that's right, and then Bill
Yeah.
Fredericks' house was right beside it.
Right
too.
over the draw.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was the airfield. Whenever George would come in from flying and we were supposed to go over and pick him up, he would buzz the house a couple times and we'd run out, you know, and wave to him. And
Well, he'd come in and land. He'd have to come right over the house. And you could almost reach up there and touch him sometimes. He'd come in and buzz the house.
How old was he when he got his license?
16.
He was 16. You have to be 16 to get a license, but he could fly before that. We used to think, man, we're about the luckiest family in town. You know, my big brother, you know, got an airplane and knows how to fly. And I remember one time, I got scared though. This was after he was by himself there and he had the airplane, and Bud Swigert was up there, and somebody else, and I forget who it was. Anyway, they wanted to go for a ride, and George said, well, that's too many. And then, he said, "I'll come on, I'll take you." Well, the airfield took off, and Bud probably remembers it, but then at the end of the airfield, then it went down a hill like that for 100 yards and then came back up. Well, the rest of us on the ground stood there watching this airplane taxi down here and get enough speed. It came clear to the end of the airfield, and instead of gaining height, it just went down the hill like and we stood there watching, wondering what happened. And pretty soon we saw the airplane just slowly coming up there. I remember Bud, he said, "Man," he said, "I didn't think it was ever going to clear that field." Anyway, that's...
You mean you guys talked George into taking it?
Yeah, that was probably it.
Did you do that, Bud? He's taking off.
He left when we mentioned his name.
What about your mother? What about her? What do you remember of her? How would you describe her?
Well, Mom was real busy, of course, with 6 kids. Taking care of us was quite a chore. And she played the piano, very musical. And I can remember everything and anything, from funerals to anything else that went on in Heartline, Mom was asked to play for. And this took an awful lot of time. Practicing, I can remember 3 or 4 quartets there in Heartline, always being down at the house practicing. And then guess who had to do the work? Who had to wash the dishes and all this sort of thing. But she really devoted a lot of her time to the community, doing things for other people.
When I was a kid, Mom, her Heartline used to always have a very large Memorial Day service. And Mom was the coordinator of that every year. That was her job to get up the program for that.
Well, this was the auxiliary club of Heartline.
They put on the memorial service?
They only met once a year, and that was to plan the memorial service.
That was to elect Mom to be the chairman, and she was
She was still doing that when I was in high school, I think.
Yeah, and she did
her last year.
She did a real good job, and she really was quite talented. And you never really think of your mother as being talented, but I can remember when Norma was in high school and we were living in Spokane. And Norma came home and said, "I have to have 5 centerpieces tomorrow for a party they were having at school, some kind of a dad's deal or something, and she said, I gotta have these centerpieces. And of course I was working at the time, and Mom was up staying with us, and I said, well, why did you wait until tonight to tell me? You know, the stores are all closed, you can't get into anything. And so she said, well, I just found out about it. And then she did confess, well, she'd had the note a couple of days. She knew about it. But anyway, the night before, she had to have them. So the next day, Mom went down to University City, along probably with Norma, and got the stuff, and they came up with 5 of the most clever centerpieces. And I was just amazed at my mother. For she never ceased to amaze me.
One of the things to remember is she liked family dinners like this, and she would cook just great meals. But angel food cakes is something that all of us kids always wanted her to fix, and she would fix those. And
Pink frosting.
Always had a pink frosting.
Yeah.
And George always got chocolate cake for his birthday. He liked chocolate, and if it wasn't chocolate cake, well then he would get chocolate pie.
One thing I remember from high school, I didn't really know George too well because the difference in our ages, he graduated and left school when I was pretty small. About the first recollection I have of George is when the Navy man came out to Eddie Edwards' house to sign George up for the Navy. I remember that because that scared me. I thought they were taking my brother off. And about the next thing I remember about George is the 2 years that he worked at Heartline as the maintenance man there for the school. And I was a junior and senior those 2 years, and Rod was a freshman and sophomore. And I really got to know George really for the first time during those 2 years. One thing I remember from those 2 years was during our baseball games, at that particular time Rod was the pitcher on the team, I was the catcher, and quite often George and Earl served as umpires. And one game that we played against Cooley City, I heard the report that Cooley City thought that was a little much with Rodney pitching and me catching, my brother behind me calling balls and strikes and all the base paths.
Cooley wondered why they couldn't beat us.
Where did George fit in the lineup there?
Okay, let's see, Eva was the oldest, and then George, and then I was number 3. Number 3 is supposed to be your problem child, but I think I was an angel. I think I just held everything together.
What do you four remember about Eva? What are some things?
Eva was the easygoing person, relaxed around the house, but Carol wanted things in order, and I mean, she worked.
Well, yes, because Eva was playing the piano all the time.
But the difference in your personalities, you like to have things in order, you like to work. Eva was very good musically, tremendous piano player, and singing. I remember when she went off to college, she went to Whitworth College for a while.
And that poor music teacher came and recruited me to stay, thinking I was a chip on the old block, and she was never so disappointed. She found out all I could do was cook. And I think George and Florence rescued me from that. Don't you remember that? From that Mrs. Hopkins, the music teacher at Whitworth College. And I stayed at her house to work my way through Kinman. And I had to work pretty hard, and I can remember George coming up. I don't know whether he was in the service or what, but anyway, he came to visit me, and she wouldn't let me go with George because I had to work. So I think about a week later he came back and he said, "That's just enough, you're working too hard." And between Florence and he, they arranged that I move in with Mrs. Isaac and over there. So that's how I stayed over there and finished Kinman.
Then Carol got a job in Spokane with Farmers Insurance, and I started going to Kinman, and we roomed together for several months.
Until Bud and I got married.
A lady called Mrs. Graves at her house.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed that. What was the Kinman?
Kidman was a
Business
business
college.
school,
I guess evidently Earl and I both went there.
evidently. We did.
That's so long ago, it's kind of hard to think about it.
I keep hearing about pranks that guys like George and this guy over here on the end kept pulling. Can we hear something about some of those things? I've been waiting for him to open up and tell us the whole story.
I can remember one prank that all of my brothers pulled on me. I went out with Bud, and I was supposed to be in at a certain time, and so they thought it'd be real funny to fix kettles of water over the front door, so when I came in, I would just get drowned, and all these kettles would fall. But in the meantime, somebody forgot and locked the front door, so when I tried to open the door to get in, I couldn't get in. So I said, oh, gee, Bud, locked out, what are we going to do? So we went around to the boys' bedroom window, and I knew that I could get the screen open, so right by your heads, Bud helped me crawl through the window, got me in the house. And the next morning, here was all this paraphernalia, it wasn't even touched.
Couldn't believe it, got up in the front door here and the stuff was still sitting there.
They had big buckets of water and they had Mom's kettles.
I think that was Earl that mistakenly locked the door. He masterminded that.
But they all blamed each other for locking that door.
Hey, where did you all sleep in Grandma's house when you were growing up? See, Grandma and Grandpa in their bedroom, and then who? Then I
Carol
think
and
Jean.
Eva had
Had a
the
room.
other bedroom.
Okay.
And they built all along in there somewhere about after Rodney was born, and after Grandma came to live with us, she took a bedroom. So they built an addition on, which
Had 2 beds in
had
it.
plenty big enough for 2 beds and playroom. And so George and Jean slept together, and Rodney and I slept together.
How far apart were George and Eva? How many years apart?
About 18 months or 20 months, something like that.
Didn't you have
But let me tell you something funny about George. Just brought to my mind. George and Eva used to stay with Grandpa Walker an awful lot because Mom was real busy playing and doing things around town. So Grandpa Walker would take care of them. And in those days, you didn't have a bathroom in the house. They had an outhouse. And so Grandpa Walker was a little deaf, and he didn't always hear what the kids were doing. And there was a little neighbor boy lived down the street from Grandma and Grandpa, and he liked Grandpa Walker an awful lot, so he was always there with him. And so this particular time, this kid and George went out to the toilet. They were gone an awfully long time, but Grandpa Walker didn't pay too much attention. Pretty soon the other kid came running back saying he had lost George. This was Johnny Booker, and it took him a long time to make Grandpa Walker understand that George was in the toilet. And I think poor old Grandpa Walker, he had to recruit help from around town to get George out. Oh, I suppose 4.
what had happened?
5. I don't remember it happening, so.
Hole too big, or?
Good observation.
Let's think of all the options.
George was always getting himself in kind of sinful predicaments.
What about Rodney? Seems like I've heard a couple good stories about him.
We might have to jar our memories.
Well, isn't there another story about an outhouse though, and either you or Eva's doll, and one of the boys, I think it was Daddy maybe,
Threw my
you
doll
had
down
done something to him and angered him, and what happened?
That's just bringing it back. I don't know, but I remember George took my doll out and threw it down the toilet. Just to see me cry, probably.
But what section of town did you live in? Did you have one hole or two hole or three hole?
We had two holders.
Well, I don't know.
That would have been middle class.
Well, no, we moved down into the Cox house and we had an indoor plumbing. I kind of think we
I must say, one thing I remember, I was pretty small, but I remember Carol. I think Carol took me to my first grade, first day of school. I remember that. And I think you were a senior, I think, when I was first grade. But I don't remember much about even George being home. I do remember though, you guys used to, somebody played the guitar, Eva, I believe, played the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And used to bring kids in the front room, and you guys used to sing with the guitar. I remember you guys, Eva, and you guys doing that.
Well, obviously they didn't want me to sing very loud.
But you used to do that quite
yes,
a bit, and
well, of
especially
course,
Eva.
all the Sig girls and Eva were always together, a threesome, and they sang together a lot. And they played their guitars, and they were always singing and entertaining. You know, it was real pleasant, and we have many a fond memory of going out to Aunt Chloe's all the time. Because that was, and of course I was about Bob's age, so I have a lot of fond memories of going out and playing with Bob and sliding down the old tin metal roofs there, where there maybe was this old shed out there with these strips of metal roofing down
It would be a
the
roof as long as
side.
that, and then about another
Yeah.
15 feet on top of it and a sharper end.
Can you remember this, Edith? That old building?
I sure can.
And there was probably maybe 3 or 4 strips of metal tin, and the rest was empty holes. And us kids played up there all the time, sliding down those roofs, and I can't remember of any of us getting injured.
What happened when you got to the end of the roof?
Then we had to jump off.
Jump off the ground about 6-8 feet. It's hard to think.
Why don't you have Gene tell about going in the rabbit business with Earl and George?
Oh, yeah.
Doing what?
Tell about your enterprise, Jim.
I'm sure they'll both want to tell the story.
Oh, that's right, those rabbits, or chickens, whatever they were.
I worked a whole summer for my summer's wages. I got $200 or $300, and that was big money. I worked my whole summer that year to get that money, and that was during the 2 years that George was living there in Heartline, and Earl was living there in Heartline. He was postmaster then, and Rod and I were in high school then, and George and Earl somewhere found out about how you can make thousands of dollars raising rabbits. And they had all of the information, the propaganda there and so forth, and so we all, at least they told me it was all of us, contributed money. My part was to put in all my summer's wages. And so we all pooled our money and sent off for the rabbits, and they came, and George built the hutches, and Earl helped us carry them up to the upper loft of the barn that you had to get to by climbing hand over hand. And my part in it, besides contributing my summer's wages, was to feed them and water them. And so, all winter long, in those cold winters over there, I had to carry out hot buckets of water. Those rabbits climbed up the stairs carrying this hot water. Of course, the cages needed cleaning about every Saturday.
That was his part too.
Now you see what I mean about picking up these golf stroke handicaps?
Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. But it was all going to pay off. You see, I was going to make a lot of money when we took the fur off of those rabbits, and they were prolific, and we were going to raise lots of more rabbits and make lots of money. By spring, about half of them were dead. The other half were too sickly to eat. And not only did I lose my investment of money and all my time, but I think really they blamed me for letting them die.
But gee,
We have never said that publicly.
yeah, I gave a check for that too. But Gene got his reward. He'd go up to Florence's and she'd bake him those chocolate chip cookies.
Best chocolate chip cookies.
Half melted in his mouth.
Play rook by the hour and eat chocolate chip cookies. Remember that, Florence? That one winter we were snowed in about 3 days and nights there at Heartline. And so we sat down at Mom's house eating chocolate chip cookies and playing rook half the night. Remember that?
It's hard to think of pranks from a younger brother, because usually they're the recipient of it, not, they don't pull pranks on bigger brothers. But, so I can think of one of George that whenever I think of something, it always sticks out in my mind. Because with boys, 4 boys around, you're always roughhousing around, and so we had a long living room like this, and then right at the end of it, you had to make a turn to go into the kitchen. And he was chasing me one day, and there was rug here, but there was linoleum like that right at the end there. And I knew he was going to kick me. And so just as we got to the end, I turned real quick, went into the kitchen, and he planted his foot to kick me like that, but he planted his foot on the linoleum. And he just shot like that, went into the wall, and just splattered. Somehow, I thought that was the funniest thing that ever happened.
That story about Rod and Dad chasing each other, and one of them went through the wall. You didn't make the corner, and your foot went through.
Oh, that was in the bathroom,
What
wasn't
was that? Who was that?
I don't know which two of you were fighting, but
Rod went through the bathroom wall.
I think he kicked me through it.
that was after I was married and I came home, and here was this hole. I said, what on earth happened?
The refuge, when someone was chasing you, used to be to race for the bathroom, get the door shut and flip the lock.
Not only that, when we...
Rod was making the race and somehow lost his footing, and instead of locking the door, went right through the wall.
And remember,
Of course, as usual, I got blamed for everything. And I had to suffer the consequences.
what was your consequences? Because you never got spanked. But I can remember if we did something, Mom would say, well, hurry up and get home and get to bed before Dad would get home, and then you won't get spanked. I can remember many a time I went to bed pretty early. So I would get spanked. And I remember Eva used to do that quite often too. She always did a few little pranks, but I don't remember them. It seemed like she was in hot water, but she was.
One thing I remember about Dad, I've never heard my dad swear, use the Lord's name in vain or anything like that, or really lose his temper. But I do remember this one time I ever heard him say even close to a cuss word. He was clear up on top of the barn, and he's putting the roofing on it, and and he's just getting ready to hammer a nail in. And he only had one hammer up there, and he dropped the hammer, turned out the bottom. And there he was, he had this big roll of roofing on one hand, a nail there and nothing to hammer. And I heard him say, damn. And that's the only time I ever heard my dad say anything like that. Did you ever hear him say?
Remember when we'd do something, and we knew Mom was going to get after us. It was in the summertime. And in those days, a lot of harvest trucks going by hauling wheat back and forth. So we knew, and Mom would always going to hit us with the fly swatter, chase us with a fly swatter. So we knew that if she was after us with a fly swatter, we could run out the door outside, and there'd always be a wheat truck or a wagon going by, and she wouldn't have the nerve to hit us.
Somebody walking.
So we used to play that little game.
Who gave you the puppies?
Oh, that was Grandpa.
The what?
Like, oh,
I remember that.
like that, remember?
Oh, Dad used to do that, too. Said, you quit that, I'll thump you.
Sitting in church, you know, if you were kind of ornery or something, or whispering or giggling, and he was so he could reach you, you know. He had a long reach. Oh. Boy, you knew where it came from. You knew you better straighten up.
Did you get together much with the state?
Oh, all
often?
yes, all the time. We really had a great growing up time with our relatives. I think this is why I like to be together with all the family, because Aunt Nettie and Uncle Ari lived up north of Almara. They had 6 kids. Aunt Chloe and Uncle Russ on the farm was 6. And we didn't see the Bolins too much because they lived down at Wapato, but quite often they would be up. And of course, you were a little bit older than some of
You
the
didn't need
kids.
them in.
Well, you were kind of more in Eva's class.
Thanks.
So anyway, but we would have great get-togethers, and I think, of course, every holiday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Easter, and then Sundays in between. I mean, we were always together, and we just were, I think as cousins, we're as close as probably some brothers and sisters are. And it's a great feeling, I think.
Aunt Chloe used to teach piano lessons, and so Mom would bribe me with taking piano lessons by saying, well, you can go out, or you can ride the school bus out, but you got to take your piano lesson. Then I get to stay all night out there and ride the school bus back in the morning. I think that's the greatest thing, get on the school bus and ride. Otherwise, I walked 100 feet. I was in the schoolhouse, and no big deal.
But Aunt Chloe was a great piano teacher.
Do you remember anything about taking baths out of Aunt Chloe's? Aunt Chloe or Grandma both together was telling us one time about you guys, how you guys had to go out there and Aunt Chloe took you back.
You want to hear how she did it?
Yeah, you tell them.
Took you under the arm and down you went in the tub, and maybe 5 or 6 others had been there before. I was there, and I didn't speak to her for 5 years. Saturday night, everybody did. They said line up, and I didn't even know what I was lining up for. How you got your hair shampooed on Saturday night and got a bath.
But you know, these women were also, I really think they were all great because they all had kids of their own, and yet they never hesitated to have any of us stay, take everybody on, you know. We used to have a lot of fun, and we'd go up to Aunt Nettie's, and the 2 oldest, Elvin and Gladys, were in college, and they had high heels in those days. Real pretty ones, and I can remember Pauline and I going up there and dressing up in their dresses and their high heels and really catching the dickens when somebody caught us, you know.
We have a picture of you in high heels. It looks like your first day.
My what?
It looks like your first day in high heels. We have a picture of you.
What do you mean my first day in high heels?
First time you ever tried.
Pretty wobbly.
Your ankles are a little wobbly.
He just talking.
32? Is that right?
He just brings up something, you know, I remember Saturday night baths, you know, we didn't have a hot water heater, so Mom would have to heat the hot water on the wood stove, and then since I was the 4th in line in the family, I was in 4th in line to take a bath. You know, by the time 4 people take a bath in the same water, I didn't take many baths.
I can remember we came home from the Methodist church one day and we was invited out for dinner. Earl had just got a new pair of socks, and in those days there wasn't much difference between ladies' socks and what girls wore and boys wore. And I think you and I probably had the same kind of socks, but anyway, you didn't like them. And here you were sitting on the davenport with a pair of scissors just cutting the nails out of it. I remember Dad walking by, what in the dickens? He had one knee cut out of his sock.
Carol,
Is that right?
Do you wear knickers?
I don't really, no, I don't think knickers. I don't think we could afford knickers.
that was a middle class wore knickers. They had knickers though when we were kids. Yeah.
My remembrance, and this is why I do not really am a gun-ho on jeans or coveralls. Not coveralls, but bib overalls. Because that's all that
We had to wear them. Yeah.
we had to wear in our day. I mean, anybody. I mean, the farmers were pretty poor in those days, and that was all they had to wear.
What was the economic condition of the family? And was Roy always a postmaster?
He was always a postmaster, and
Really, at that time, that was during the Depression, when crops were bad and the country as a whole was in the middle of a depression. He actually had a better job as a government employee
then the farmers.
than most people, so we didn't suffer. But because the economy was bad, well,
Because, you know, nobody was doing great in those days. You did not know what a banana was, and the only time you got an orange was for Christmas in your stocking.
I was going to ask you to say something about Christmas. Did you always get lots of presents and things like that?
No.
no.
Christmas stocking. I can always remember a Christmas stocking, but
There was always
I
something,
don't remember too
something
many
in it.
presents.
And this takes me back to think about Rodney. He, being a little tyke, you know, how when, this is as we were getting older, and I think maybe I was even married, I don't remember. But, oh, no, probably not, that was before. But, you know, we were all busy getting our Christmas presents and getting them wrapped up, and little Rodney wanted to make sure that everybody got something, and I don't know where you got the money, but anyway, he went down to Bud's folks' hardware store and bought an ashtray for Mom.
Oh, is that right? I
Yeah.
remember.
You know? It was a glass, probably, you know, 10 or 15 cent ashtray back in those days, but it was a crystal glass, and you know, Mom kept that up on the top of the cupboard for years and years and years. And
Because Rodney gave it to her.
Rodney gave it to her. She didn't know what. She treasured that. But and then Jean went around, and Rodney too, getting things around the house. Wanted to be sure we all had a present, so we might have got our own cones wrapped.
What kind of pranks did the Sigs pull?
Is this an R-rated show?
Edith would probably have to probe our memory there, because I
They
think
were pretty rough, I can tell you.
sometimes you're kind of shook in your boots, and Aunt Chloe used to like to really thrash her kids, and I can remember Bob did something, and I was kind of partial to Bob because he was near my age and we were pretty good friends, and he really got a tanning, and I remember I sat there crying, I want to go home. I want to go home. Aunt Chloe came over and said, well, you don't have to cry just because Bob was naughty and had to have a spanking. And he needed that.
I mentioned earlier that I didn't really get to know George until my junior and senior year when he lived in our memory. And I, likewise with Eva, I didn't know Eva really, because she was graduated from high school and gone before I was really old enough to remember. Until during the war, after Mark had finished basic training, and then he went overseas, and Eva came back to live with us in Heartline. And Carol Arlene was real little then. And that was when I really got to know Eva. We packed Carol Arlene around just...
We tried to feed, Carol Arlene didn't like spinach. Mark was down determined she was going to eat spinach. And he'd finally get it in Carol Arlene's mouth. And he'd think he'd had it made, and all of a sudden, Carol Arlene just blow it out.
One time we thought she'd already swallowed it, and turned to get another bite, and...
Which brings to mind when George got out of high school, he went down to Los Angeles to take that airplane course or whatever it was. And anyway, he got him a little Austin down there to drive around. And Bill Sig was getting married, so he wanted to come home for Bill's wedding. And he drove that little Austin day and night to get home, and he made it just in time to walk in. I think he was even in the wedding party. Walk in and walk down the aisle or something like that. But anyway, he just jumped out of this little Austin and left it right in the middle of the road.
Right in the middle of the street he left it.
Right in front of the church. But that Austin was on a contract. In those days, you were not supposed to take an automobile out of the state if it was on a contract. And so school was just about out, and I think I must have been sophomore, junior in high school. Anyway, the car broke down. George had to get back to work. So I don't know whether he took a bus and got back, or you didn't fly in those days. I mean,
Wasn't he flying?
there wasn't any commercial
Commercial
flights,
airlines.
anything like that. So he probably took a bus and went back to California. So then here, after Aldridge's down at Coulee City got the car fixed, here was this car that had to be taken back to California. So finally Eva wanted to take it back. She wanted to drive it back down. And Dad didn't know about that. So finally she got the bright idea, maybe if she'd take me along, well, the folks would let her take that car back down to George. So they consented. So Eva and I started out with this car, taking it down to California to George. We got to Vantage and the car broke down on us. And so we stopped at a guy and he hauled us to Vantage, towed in the car for us, and we had to stay there all night at Vantage, get that car repaired. Not much money including it. And we weren't going to call the folks. No way. So they never did know that. And then we got down to Goldendale, and that car broke down again. And we were sitting there in this broken down car, and we was at a truck stop or something like that. And so Eva said, "There's a truck driver. Carol, get out and go ask him if we can ride to California." And I thought, I'm not going to do that. She said, "Well, what are you going to do, just sit here?" And so she talked me into going and asking that truck driver if he would haul that car down to California. And so the guy was underneath the truck. And so I go and crawl underneath the truck. Pardon me, but our little car here broke down, and we're supposed to be getting it back to my brother who's down in California, and you wouldn't have room to haul it down there, would you? And he said, "Well, I don't know." So he came out and went over and talked to Eva, and they talked for a long time. The first thing I knew, well, he was loading this little car up in the back end of his deal, and Eva and I hopped in the front seat and rode to California. Now, we haven't told that story very many times. And
it turned out this guy lived a mile and a half, didn't he, from where George
well,
lived?
George was living at the Concord house, staying, and this was a men's house, men's dormitory, and he was going to North American or
North.
Is that what it was, North America? Airplane factory or something down there. And so he took us right to Concord House. That's where we were to meet George. He'd had us send George a telegram telling what had happened to us and when we'd be in. We pulled in about 9 o'clock at night. And they had a colored guy that, I guess you say, he took care of all these boys in this house. And George had a roommate, but the roommate was gone for the weekend. And so this guy let George sneak Eve and I in. And we got to sleep in this guy's bed in George's room for the night. Until we could figure out what he was going to do with us, I guess, the next day. Anyway, we got his car back to California. Then we wrote a letter to the
You
folks.
wrote a letter to the folks. When they got that letter, Dad just about flipped. I remember that. Riding down there with a truck driver.
You know, I could never even stay after dark, could you?
Well, the guy drove straight through, day and night. And it took, I think, maybe another day from Goldendale to get down there. And then after we got down there, George was evidently working for North American at that time, because then he rented a house from, what's those people's name in Coulee City? Aaron's son lived down there. And so they had a house right next door to them in, I think, Inglewood. And so we stayed all summer with George in that house, and George went to the Assembly of God Church in Glendale, I guess. And of course, when we went to church with George on Sunday morning, and this is where Mark and Eva met. George and Mark were friends through the church, and so, of course, George took us to church and introduced us to Mark. And
I think Mark at that time was the youth
leader.
Yeah.
Down there. But evidently I looked old, because I can remember Mark coming up to me and he said, "Oh, you two must be George's sisters." And he said, "You must be Eva." I said, "No, I'm Carol. I'm the youngest."
You have been mistaken when I was, I think, a freshman in college. You've been mistaken as for my mother, Carol. Remember? Medical aid. That's what I
I don't know about.
Remember that, Virginia?
That wasn't your mother. That was Virginia's mother.
Our child grandmother, that was her.
That's what it was. Pauline was chosen to go in for baby Spokane. So I went in with Virginia. And naturally I was holding Colleen. I enjoy little kids was holding her. And this photographer from the Spokesman Review came along and he said, "Pardon me, ma'am, but are you the baby's grandmother?"
Carol did not like that.
I think I just smiled at him.
I didn't like it.
What did I say?
I don't think you said anything to him, but you were irritated after he left.
But several times when I was working in Spokane, Gene and Rodney would come up and I'd keep them for the weekend and have to take them for dentist appointments. And yes, I was. Everybody did think they were my kids. I'd have to set everybody straight.
Then Mark and Eva, did they just start writing to each other when you and
No,
Eva came back?
I had to come back to go to school, and Eva stayed down and went to work for the telephone company. And Mark and Eva started going together, and they got married down in Glendale. And I don't remember when they came up to Washington. So the folks had not met Mark until they came up a year or so later.
Earl, were you working at the post office before Grandpa died?
No. The dad was probably postmaster for 25 years. He had never, in all that time, taken a vacation. And he wasn't feeling good, so I was working for Bud at that time, and he drove up there, he and Mom, and he talked to Bud, wanted to know if I could come down and run the post office for a few weeks, because he wanted to take some time off, because he had a lot of time built up. And so Bud said, yeah, and so I came down on Monday morning with him, or Sunday night. I went to work Monday morning, and so he started his vacation, and he passed away probably Tuesday night or something like that.
He wasn't feeling good, and George and Florence stopped in to see Dad. He was in bed, I think, and they had Diana with them, and Diana was up jumping all over Grandpa's bed and everything. And they said, Dad said, well, sure wished I felt as good as you do. And then I think the next morning he passed away.
So did you just continue working then for the post office at that point?
Well, yes, he had sent in a recommendation I take over in his absence, so I had to notify Washington D.C. that he had passed away, and they wanted to know who I'd recommend to replace him on a temporary basis, so I sent my name in. And then, at those times, it was a political process. Then the political party in power then appointed the postmaster, or recommended the postmaster. So we started the political process with our county commissioners, and actually Reverend Wilson from Cooley was the one that really carried the ball. He went around to see all the key people, and finally about a year and a half later I received a permanent appointment.
Any questions?
Well, I think that's about do it, Cindy. I think
We bared our souls. Anything else you want to know?
The boss has spoken.
why don't you go tell us?
What year did you lose Eva?
1961, I think.
And didn't you lose George in like
1960,
60?
I think.
Just
Yeah,
a year
that's
apart.
a year apart.
July each year.
Stop.
Did you ever take any family vacations together, all of you?
In those days, that was
Didn't take vacations, but we took
Fourth
one
of July.
vacation. Okay, I'll tell mine. The time that sticks out in my mind, besides all these times we get together with the family, Carol and Jean and Roddy and I all took a trip to Leavenworth to the hospital to get our tonsils and adenoids out. We thought that was the biggest thing. We got to stay, eat ice cream,
and stay in the Cascading Hotel in Wenatchee
stay in the hotel. Yeah, that was something.
Mass surgery?
Yeah, we took all 4 of our tonsils out. Dad and Mom both went with us, and gee, we drove around Leavenworth and got to see the sights, and we just thought we were great. And then
Which 4?
Us 4 right here. They lined us up there, the doctors.
And I was the oldest, so when it came time to, who's going to be first, well, nobody volunteered. And the doctor said, well, you're the oldest, so he said, I'll take you first. So they laid you down the table, and those days just stretched you out on the table, and then stuck an old ether mask on your nose. And they didn't strap you down. They thought we were pretty weak-looking kids. So I guess when they put that ether mask on, I just raised, get out. Kicked and fought, and they had to hold me down and everything. So then these other 3 guys got strapped down.
That's the only thing I remember about that trip. I don't remember the good time and fun going around town. I just remember being strapped in.
That was our big vacation.
That was our vacation.
Not a very fun vacation.
Well, in conclusion, what I remember most is on the 4th of July, it seemed to be a family tradition that you go to Spokane to the Natatorium Park.
Oh, yeah.
Liberty Lake.
And Liberty Lake.
And Natatorium Park at night.
Yeah. Ken's signaling that he's out of film.
Well, and our folks were real good every Sunday after church.
You mean signaling the disc golf time?
Yeah. We always got to go swimming every Sunday afternoon. At Blue Lake.
Take us down to Blue Lake, and that was your outing for the week.
That's right. And this not only was our family, this was all of the relatives.
And those family reunions continued for years though, because I can remember as a child going to Sun Lakes for the 4th of July with all the
Blue Lake used to have just a little place there.
Rod wants to play golf.
We're going to golf fast with the bathroom.
I think we're supposed to have 6 o'clock tea.
Okay.
So we've got another minute.
Help you wrap it up there.
You tell what you think of your older brothers and sisters.
Well, the only thing I remember is I always got the hand-me-downs, clothes. I was always...
Where do you think Gene got it?
I got jeans.
I know.
Who do you think
Of course, I was always the smallest, so of course I was always the one that was picked on all the time. That's mainly what I remember.
Rodney used... That's right, Rodney was smallest. We had 6 cows we had to milk all the time. You know, by the time Rodney was 6 or 7 years old, we had him trained. He could go out and milk all 6 of those cows. Remember that? And we'd feed the pigs, and feed the chickens, and Rodney'd in there milking those 6 cows.
That's what I'm talking about.
And then you would tell him what fun it was to put him beside the pig, make him grab the pigs by the tail, and they'd wheel him around. He would ride those things. We got pictures of that.
We used to have a milk run. Nobody had refrigerated milk at that time in the store, so we had a milk route around town to make money. And so you'd have so many quarts of milk you had to have every night. I mean, if it was 20, the cows better give that much milk. And once in a while, you come up, you only had 18 quarts when you're supposed to have 20.
Girl, you're not supposed to count.
Yeah, I don't think that's very nice. I don't want you to sound nice.
And so we just leave a couple of people out.
You wouldn't finish your route.
Yeah. So George would say, or Rodney would say, somebody would say, well, this is these are Holstein cows. They got a lot of cream in this milk. It could be watered down a little bit. We got to have 20 quarts. So they'd pour a couple of quarts of water and they'd mix it all together again. Then it'd go through and be separated again, and you'd have 20 quarts.
Didn't your folks have do some kind of newspaper or something at one time too?
Oh, no.
Dad was the editor for the Heartline Standard, yeah.
Didn't you do it at the house or?
No, I did that at the post office.
Oh.
How often did that come out?
So about what?
How often did it come out?
It's the forerunner now of the Cooley City paper.
Oh.
Now, when did that happen?
Weekly.
Yeah, once a week. Well, I can remember going through the old post office files, and he'd have,
Oh, well, okay.
he'd have papers there going back into the 1920s with Roy Carey, editor.
Are you under pressure, Roger?
Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask Charlene?
Well, I think we should have Edith tell some stories.
Yeah, I do too. Edith, why don't you come on over and sit right
Okay,
here?
can we,
No, I'm with Rodney. I think it's a wonderful time to end it all.
How about if it's convenient later, in about 2 hours?
Well, I think we bared our souls.
Yeah, I think these people are getting
Let's give
bored.
a chance to think up some things.
Rodney, you know you don't want me to start talking.
I
I think
The
it
rest
would be
of
so
us do.
funny, Edith, I'd be
Sure.
right behind you.
We could talk about Rodney
Rodney?
and Jerry and,
We'll be gone in 2 hours.
Okay.
But I can remember many a time having to take care of Rodney and Jean, and both of them going to church and packing. The kids would go to sleep, and I'd have to pack them out, toss them in the back seat of the car. And Dad used to carry Earl out until Eva said, "I'm so embarrassed. Dad, I wish you'd quit that." He goes, "Of course, can I remember that Earl's legs would be dangling down so long they'd be brushing the floor." It got to be a joke. Because Earl couldn't stay awake only 2 seconds after he got there. And Dad would hold him in his arms, and then pretty soon, I suppose his arms would get tired. So he'd get up and probably hit the people next to him with his feet. Pack him out, put him in the car. And I can remember Eva just saying, "I'm so embarrassed, Dad. That kid is too big." And of course, Mom was always up in front playing the piano.
Edith, why don't you come take my place?
Edith, come
No,
sit
we're
right here.
I think this is...
we're gonna cut it off.
Yeah, let's, okay. There doesn't seem to be any more questions, so.
A couple of concluding remarks.
Rodney, for so much, I'll leave for Seattle.
Okay, well, this
He
concludes.
hasn't got that much in the bank.
The rest of us would really like to continue here, but Rodney is jumping at the bit to play golf, so we're going to have to conclude. And so we're signing off at 5:51:9/185. That's it.
How long did we talk?
2 hours.
Yeah.